Hello aqua friends, welcome to my channel. My name is Nicole and today we're going to do this beautiful parrot. Look at how adorable this parrot is, and I'm going to walk you through step by step my process to make this beautiful vibrant creature. So we're going to start off, of course, you need to trace your parrot on a piece of watercolor paper. I use Arches or the Honeymoon Collection series. I find that using quality artist watercolor paper is the first important step in order to get a successful painting. It's the most important thing in your watercolor arsenal. So I have this parrot traced on my paper, and then I'm going to wet him really, really well. You want to take your time and use a large brush to wet the parrot, and you're going to go over him a few times. This should definitely take about 3 to 4 minutes. I know that seems like a lot of time, but the water needs to really get absorbed in the middle of the paper so that the paper stays wet longer. So a lot of the times I will start off by wetting the paper, wetting my bird. And when I have that layer just kind of floating on the surface there, then I'll go over to my palette and I'll start wetting my colors and getting all my colors nice and juicy and ready to paint. And then I'll go back and re-wet the bird actually. So that's going to ensure that he stays wet for a really long time. Your paper should actually start to buckle. Now I do have my painting taped down on a board. This does help with the buckling, but I have no desire to stretch paper and that sort of thing. So quick tip here for you. Since watercolor paper is made out of cotton, when you're done painting, to get rid of any of the warps, you can just iron your paper. Tea towel over the painting and just iron it and let it dry under a big set of books, and that will ensure that your painting is nice and flat. I do have a video on how I go about ironing my paper with steam, and I will put that as a link in the top corner for you right now, so you can check that out as well. So back to the painting here. You do see that my painting is warped with water, and I'm starting off with the lightest colors. And so there's some really pretty blues on the top of his head. And then the first yellow that I'm using is my cadmium yellow light. The blues I have in my palette, I have a cool blue and a warm blue. His blue coloring is definitely on the warm side, so I do have the little blue yellow shade. I also have a little bit of marine blue possibly in my palette. For this very vibrant green underpainting that I'm working on, that is green gold from Daniel Smith. I absolutely love this color. It's like one of my favorite colors that I have in my palette. So he is a very, very warm greens, and I'm putting those colors in. And notice I'm varying. So sometimes I'm picking up more yellow, sometimes I'm picking up more green. And everything is going to kind of blend together. Now, coming in with those warmer yellows that I'm seeing, that color that I have in my palette is the Aussie yellow, or no, Aussie gold, I believe it's called. Also from Daniel Smith, and it's a very warm yellow, like a school bus yellow. It's just gorgeous jewel tone color. So notice that he is quite vibrant on his wings as well. You have some really, really nice yellows on the peaks of his wings. So I am working meticulously around the bird. I'm trying to put in all the colors that I need to before my paper dries. There's a teeny bits of red on him, not much, but so I'm using that sparingly. And then when I'm going into my green colors, of course, my workhorse green is my sap green. I do love that color. I do have hooker's green. It's a little bit more of a brighter green. So I am using that in the mix as well. So varying up your colors will add interest and depth to your painting. So he is quite dark underneath the wings. So I'm trying to kind of build up those darker green colors. My darkest green that I just grabbed in that palette is shadow green. So it's a very desaturated green, and it is quite dark, and it is fantastic for those darkest greens that you need to add in there. Of course, you can always go on the opposite side of the color wheel and grab some red. When you mix red and green together, you will get a very desaturated, darker version of the color. So I switched my brush now. I am using like a dagger brush. I love the wispy ends to this, and I do feel like it is a perfect type of brush to use to get those textures of feathers for painting birds. Okay, so I'm doing some large sweeping motions with that brush to get the feathers of his belly. The ones on the belly are larger than the smaller little pin feathers on his head. Basically, you're going to pay attention to your paper and what your paper's doing. If there are some areas that are too dry, I would stay away from those. You won't be able to go back over them in this round. I kind of wanted him to be mostly a one-layer painting, so I'm going to try to get as much done as I can in this first layer. There's a lot of area to cover while he's wet, and I did end up doing a second layer, I do have to say. But I am getting better. I'm practicing, and I'm trying to get them all done in one layer, but it really depends on the size of the project you're working on. So I'm kind of testing it out, and I'm seeing that, okay, these marks that I'm making, they're not blending into the paper. As you can see, they're not blending in very well. So I know that I'm running out of time. My paper is drying. And you also have to be aware of how much moisture you have on your brush. As your paper dries, you use less water. Notice that the colors that I have in my palette, they're not like sopping wet. They're actually quite dry. Your brush has to be more on the dry side so that you don't make a watercolor bloom, and that, or cauliflower, whatever you want to call them, that will mar that soft, fuzzy texture that I'm trying to make. And you'll learn that just by trial and error and practicing. All right, so he is dry. The first layer is dry, and I wanted to put some more color on his face. Basically, the wings are pretty good, but his main body needs more green. So I'm going to go over and start with the top first and his head. I really wanted to increase the blue around his beak. And that's another thing about using quality paper, guys, is that you can add 2 layers. I have worked with other papers where you go to wet the layer, wet your paper again to do a second layer, and then the colors start to move and lift on you, and it's just a nightmare. Arches doesn't do that, and neither does the Honeymoon Collection series. The pigments pretty much stay and allow you to do more than 1 layer. So I'm really liking that a lot better. He's looking much more greener. And to really get the contrast that we need and the shadows around the sides of his belly where the wings are, I have to increase that darkness. And so I am going over onto the side that's even dry so that I get some very defined lines here. And notice that really made him a lot more three-dimensional. So to help you figure out your value, you can squint at the reference photo and it kind of blurs things and everything just becomes values. And so you look where your lightest values are, where your darkest values, and then squint at your painting and see where you need to add some of these darker colors. So he is shaping up to be quite handsome. I'm very, very happy with this parrot. He turned out so pretty. So I have myself a good amount of the warm blues, and I'm using a script liner brush to kind of pull that out so that I can get some textures here, some fuzzy feathers sticking out around his beak. He's got a little bit on his cheek here, so I'm pulling that down. I'm making sure that my paintbrush is not too wet, so I'm wiping off some of the paint on my towel. So now I'm mixing up green and red. It's going to give me a neutral color, kind of like a brownish gray, just to get those shadows under his beak. All right, and with a script liner brush, just creating a little bit more defined textures of some feathers around his face, some of those pin feathers with my warm yellow, my Aussie red gold. All right, so I'm going to let that dry and then I'm going to work on his beak. So in my palette here, I have some darker red, so like a crimson red. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but I will find the tube and I'll put the description in the video. So I'm just going with that color, that red, as a underpainting. Because when we look at the reference photo, it's kind of a fleshy tone underneath the darker colors of his beak. Then I'm mixing my red and green to get a neutral color. Okay, so I have this kind of neutral, fleshy, brownish color. And I'm adding some sepia and neutral tint to my palette. So I'm going to mix those together so I get a nice, really dark color here for his beak, and adding that while his beak is still wet. And I'm dabbing that in. I'm leaving some lighter areas like I see in the reference photo. And then we'll be lifting some of those light lines, kind of like etched lines that we see on his beak. So I kind of have to wait for that to dry a little bit before I can lift color. So while I'm waiting, I'm just going to add a little bit more textures around his beak and on his face. And as it dries, when I see areas where I need to darken some things up, like right where the gap is in his beak, I'm going to increase that and around his nostril. So here I go with my lifting. You're basically taking a damp script liner and just kind of drawing in the lines that you see. Now I have to stress, you have to wipe off your brush on a piece of paper towel first, because if you have too much water on your brush, you're going to make a big bloom instead of the lines, the nice scratchy lines that we see. It's just going to be a big blob and you'll wreck the effect and you'll have to redo the first step. You could practice on a spare piece of paper. It's a timing issue, really. Everything in watercolor is a timing issue and moisture control. Basically, that is what's going to improve your skills. Those are kind of things that you can practice. So notice it just is, it's very light, it's very subtle, but it adds a lot of realism. So once I'm happy with that, I'm going to move on to the eyeball, and basically he's got quite the yellow, and then there's the dark brownish center, and he's got red around the yellow, and there's lots going on. So while I have the yellow in there, I don't want a very defined pupil. It's kind of blends all together like you see in the reference photo. So the brown that I'm adding in the center will soften into the yellow a little bit, and then around the edges of the yellow, I'm adding in my red. From there, he goes back to a darker edge. So dipping my brush back into the sepia and neutral tint. And he even has like eyelashes. So I think it's a girl bird, and she's just darling. So I did add the eyelashes too, because why not? He's so cute. She's cute. Girl, boy, not sure. Actually, in nature, they say the most colorful birds are the males. So this one is actually probably a male. Now, he does have some big feet. And just dipping my brush back into that desaturated little puddle I made of some fleshy colors to do the first layer on his feet. So notice I just did that wet on dry. So the first very light layer was my wet on dry, and now both paws are wet. So I'm adding in the darker colors and shaping his feet at this point. Adding some dark shadows, and then the very last part that I'll be working on are the claws, and just drawing in the very tips. It's kind of like you're drawing with the tip of your brush. So while I'm waiting for his feet to dry before I can do the perch that he's on, I can do the bottom part of his feathers here, his tail feathers. So I'm going to work it in the same way, wetting it really well, and then dropping in the colors. Now I have a very small area to work with, so I don't have to worry about it staying wet for too long because there's not too much to paint there. So coming in with the same color so that it's consistent. I got the cadmium yellow and the warmer yellow, the green gold undertones. And you're just going to make sure you vary up your colors like that. There's even a teeny bit of red in a couple of spots, so I did grab a little bit of that. Going back to my green colors. Again, I'm using Hooker's Green and Sap Green are the main greens here. That nice vibrant green that he is. And not last but not least is that dark shadow green, continuing the wing tips. Now it looks much brighter than the bird, but remember watercolor dries 25% lighter. So now that he's dry, it does all match quite nicely. So I'm using a stiff brush and I'm further lifting on his beak, some scratchy marks like I see in the reference photo, just to enhance a little bit more realism here. And the last part, last but not least, instead of the wire cage that he's sitting on the reference photo, I decided to make it a branch and have it more organic looking. So same thing that we've been doing. I'm wetting the area first. Now for branches, I love mixing either ultramarine or cobalt, which are cool blues, and you mix it with sienna, burnt sienna. And the blues and the oranges are opposite on the color wheel, and they make fantastic grays. And especially when you don't mix them on the palette, but you let them kind of mingle on the paper, you get some very beautiful colors. My daughter right now is yelling at our bird downstairs. We have a cockatiel, and he's like a teenager. He likes to get into mischief. Sometimes I bring him up here to paint with me, but he's a very young bird right now. He's not even 1 year old, so he tends to like to walk across my paintings. It's always fun trying to chase him around. So what I'm doing here is my paper is drying, so I'm using that to my advantage by trying to add some shadows underneath his claws. Okay, so then once I'm happy with that, the last little touch is a tiny little lighter spot on the eyeball for catching the light. I was having a hard time lifting because it's such a light area, so a little bit of white gouache will do the trick. Sign your painting. You guys are done. You just created a masterpiece. Congratulations. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I'll see you guys next time.